Hey everyone, and welcome to SkillCapped. In this guide, you'll be learning the 9 most common reasons why players suck at aiming. This list is based on the most common mistakes that I see from players that I coach. These are things that hold back their aim from getting better, and often they aren't even aware they're making these mistakes in the first place. And don't worry, this list won't contain the same old boring tips of aim at headshot level. I really made the effort to identify problems that most players aren't aware of. Now, for the question of the day, what is the aiming technique or mechanic that you've been trying to get better at but just aren't seeing the results that you want? This could be more advanced techniques like strafe shooting, or maybe you just wish you didn't crouch into spraying every single time you got into a gunfight. Let us know in the comment section below as we read all of them and often create guides based on your feedback. Alright, to start us off, the first reason why your aim sucks is that you're probably not fully understanding the difference between pre-aiming an angle and tracing an angle. These two mechanics are basically the key to aiming around corners properly. And so if you don't understand them and when to apply each of them, the foundation of your aim immediately is on shaky ground. So first, let's briefly go over what is pre-aiming. A good piece of advice I always give my students when they work on their pre-aiming is to pretend as if they have wall hacks. What I mean by this is that you want to literally try to envision what's on the other side of the wall as if you can see through them. You then aim your crosshair at headshot level of the angle an enemy could hold on that other side of the wall. You then peek into this angle. This is what pre-aiming is. You're aiming through the wall at the most likely angle an enemy would hold, and then peeking and making sure you end up with your crosshair on them. Now, the second technique is what's known as tracing, or tracing an angle, or tracing the corner. This is exactly what it looks like. I hold my crosshair next to the corner I'm peeking and keep it there as I move around the corner. Then as I peek the next corner, I continue to do this. The better you are at this technique, the smoother that it should look. So the reason why we do this is that if you suddenly run into an enemy holding an angle, your crosshair will be right on his head. Essentially, it's being used to clear a ton of angles at once when you're moving fast. So as you saw, these are two completely different techniques and ways of clearing angles. So when should you use one over the other? Well, pre-aiming is done to clear the very common angles players hold. You often walk up to the angle, pre-aim, then swing into the peek. Tracing is done in every other situation when pre-aiming would just be too time-consuming. You're often tracing when you have to move fast or just straight shift walking on a flank or sneaking into sight. And it's really that simple. By default, you should be tracing every corner, then choosing to integrate pre-aiming on the high-value angles. However, despite this being simple and the complete foundation to most of your aiming, very few players below Diamond use these mechanics as consistently as they should, and that's why it's on the list. And if you're confused about any of the techniques that we cover in this guide, remember what you find here on our YouTube channel is just a taste of the hyper improvement system on our website skillcapped.com. It's there you'll not only find over 700 premium Valorant guides organized in structured courses that are easy to follow and optimized to help you improve as fast as possible. But we also have an expanding library of live Smurf commentaries, a feature no one else offers. These are by some of the top Valorant players breaking down how you too can climb out of every rank in Valorant in real time, ranging from Iron to Diamond. All of this can be unlocked with no risk with our rank improvement guarantee, so click the link in the description below, head to skillcapped.com and get the rank you've always wanted. Now for the second reason why your aim sucks, it has to do with one of the most common misplays I see when in a 1v1 scenario. If you are in an isolated fight against an opponent and both of you know where each other are, then you do not want to just passively hold the angle and wait for the opponent to peek you. This is due to a concept I'm sure many of you are familiar with called peeker's advantage. Peeker's advantage is often misunderstood though. This is a natural part of any FPS game and it's due to the nature of playing games over the internet and ping. Essentially, all you have to know is that the person peeking will always get a reaction time advantage due to them seeing the enemy on their screen a bit earlier. This reaction time advantage, due to peeker's advantage, is usually in the 40 to 70 millisecond range on average. Now, that may not seem like much, but consider the average human reaction time is 250 milliseconds, and you suddenly realize by being the one peeking, you're artificially making yourself react faster by at least 20%. That's insane. And so if you're in a scenario where you're facing an opponent and you both know where each other are, and there's no way for the enemy to really switch up the angle he's playing on you, then you need to be the aggressor and go for the peek on him instead of hanging back and letting him peek you. There's basically this invisible tactical battle going on in the background that most players don't realize, which is who is going to get peeker's advantage in this fight. You want to take advantage of this, seize the peeker's advantage, and suddenly you'll notice you're clutching these kinds of 1v1s way more often. Now, our next issue players have in regards to aiming is not realizing that there are actual viable situations when running and gunning is the correct choice. I know this may come to some of you as a surprise, and don't get me wrong, as a general rule, you never want to move while shooting, you'll just be insanely inaccurate. However, like all rules, as you become better at the game, you learn the exceptions to them and when you should break them. Firstly, always run and gun at very close ranges. If you are 5 meters or under, run and gun with literally every single gun in the game. This is due to perspective. Since you are close to the enemy, they take up much more of your screen and become a much bigger target. This means your bullets will have more room to go all over the place and still hit that large target on your screen. And yes, this even means with pistols, spam that left click if you're at this close of a range. You never want to be that guy standing still trying to hit moving targets in those super close range 1v1s. Secondly, you can run and gun at further ranges with the Stinger and Frenzy due to their insane high fire rate, as well as shotguns due to their good moving accuracy not being an issue. For the Frenzy and shotguns, always run and gun at 10 meters or under, while with the Stinger, you can run and gun at 15 meters or under. This is because the Stinger is just that broken. And believe it or not, there's actually an optimal way to run and gun. If you incorporate counter strafing, you can make your running and gunning more accurate. So instead of running in one direction during your entire spray, try counter strafing back and forth as you spray instead. Even though you're spraying and running, each time you counter strafe, you'll give yourself a second of standing still accuracy that will make your spray suddenly become a bit more accurate overall. On top of this, it will just make your movement more unpredictable. It's just the better option than running in the same direction the whole time. Alright, so for the third reason why your aim is bad, and it has to do with the way accuracy works in Valorant. Most players already know how accuracy reset works in Valorant. You shoot, wait for the crosshair to go back to its original location, and then you have first bullet accuracy once again. However, there is a massive part of this mechanic that most players misunderstand. So pay attention to how I'm spraying past 9 bullets and maxing out my recoil and bullet spread. This is just the most inaccurate I could possibly be. I then let my accuracy reset, but I'll purposely take a shot just before it fully resets. Notice how despite being just like a few milliseconds from fully resetting my accuracy, it still considers me to be in that full spray mode, and so my next shot is insanely inaccurate. What this essentially means is that if you're off by even a single millisecond when resetting your accuracy, if you don't let it reset fully and shoot that just a little bit too early, your bullets are going to have that same level of inaccuracy as if you had just continued spraying. Players don't realize this and instead think that if they let like half their accuracy reset and then fire again, well then it's not perfectly accurate, but it will at least be a bit more accurate than if they had continued spraying. This is a complete myth and not true. It's a misunderstanding of the mechanic. Your accuracy has to be fully reset. It's completely binary. Either it's reset or it's not, and you'll be as inaccurate as your last bullet. There's no in between. And I can't tell you how common this mistake is, where players are thinking they're resetting their accuracy after they shoot, but then they fire their next bullet just that tad bit too early before it had fully reset, and they're completely inaccurate because of it. In addition to this is one of the most common reasons why people are terrible with pistols. They think they're letting their accuracy reset between bullets when in reality, they're just off by a few milliseconds. So you'll want to head into practice mode and test this out yourself. Really get the feel of letting your accuracy reset. You need to get that muscle memory of that timing, or else it doesn't matter how good you are at aiming, as your bullets will be flying all over the place. Now for our next tip, I want to cover the mistakes players make in regards to spraying, because it's genuinely one of the most underdeveloped skills, or at least misunderstood skills that I see in Valorant. And one of the biggest reasons for this is that players spray way too often. Pretty much if they ever get into a gunfight, they're hitting that crouch button and committing to the spray and basically just going all in. Someone is going to die, and half of the time it's going to be them. There is a time and a place to do this kind of spray, but it's not the default way you should be approaching every single fight. For example, by default, you should integrate cover to your positions. When you are peeking angles, you should have cover nearby to fall back to instead of just wide swinging out into the open. As long as you have cover to fall back to, then you should be just shooting a quick burst of bullets and falling back behind cover, no crouching and spraying. This will make your bullets extremely accurate while then getting you back to safety as soon as the recoil and inaccuracy begins to kick in. Now, I know what you're asking yourself, well, what about when I don't have cover? Well, that's exactly when you should be hitting that crouch button and committing to a spray. It makes perfect sense why. If you're caught out in the open, then you have no cover to move to, and so you're better off just planting yourself in your spot and spraying, trying to kill the opponent as fast as possible. The second scenario you should commit to a spray is when you see you tagged an opponent with your first 2 bullets. This overrides the previous rule of falling back to cover after your first burst. If you notice that your first 2 bullets hit, well then the opponent is very low on health, and so you can commit to the spray as you only need a few more bullets to land for them to die. Compare that to if you missed your initial burst of 2 to 3 bullets, well then if you have cover nearby, fall back to it, as spraying is highly unlikely to kill them before they kill you. Alright, so moving on, we have another super common issue players have without even realizing it, and that's that they think they have standing still accuracy when they shoot, when in reality they're actually still moving on their first bullet or 2. So check out this clip. You'll notice I'm running and then coming to a standstill to spray. Here's the thing, my first bullets are actually extremely inaccurate due to the fact that I started shooting just that little bit earlier than when I actually came to a standstill. I can't begin to emphasize just how common this problem is and how players don't realize they're actually doing this. Players know that they shouldn't move and shoot, and they think that they solved that issue when in reality, their first bullet or 2 is still inaccurate. There are a few ways you can identify whether you're making this mistake and to start fixing it. First, pay attention to your tracers and bullet markers on your first few bullets. They should basically be going exactly where your crosshair is, as there's almost no recoil or bullet spread at this point. So if you notice that your first few bullets are anywhere away from your crosshair, then you know you didn't actually come to a standstill. The second option is to go into your settings, then the crosshair tab, and enable movement error. This will give you a visual representation of when you have movement inaccuracy, as your crosshair will expand and then become small when you're actually fully accurate. This can be a great training tool for players who are struggling with this issue, as they can make sure they don't shoot unless their crosshair has returned to being small. Alright, and the next reason why players have bad aim is that they are aiming down sights at way too close of ranges. Here's the thing about aiming down sights in Valorant: your gun will have a lower fire rate, increasing the time to kill on enemies. At the same time, it massively slows down your movement speed, so trying to take a shot and get back to cover becomes much more difficult. And if all of this wasn't enough, it makes spraying nearly impossible to do effectively. This is because when you aim down sights, the way recoil and bullet spread works completely changes. Instead of having their typical pattern, it will shoot bullets randomly around where your crosshair is aimed. This makes it way too random and difficult to control reliably. This means you never ever want to spray when aiming down sights on a rifle. If you're going to scope in on a rifle, then you're looking to land that one-shot headshot from far range. That is it. Now, some of you may be thinking that this is a bit strange. Why did the developers even add aiming down sights if it's so weak? Well, we can't answer that question, but what we can tell you is that very few pros will ever aim down sights unless in extremely high range conditions, and typically only with the Vandal, since it will be a one-shot headshot at that range. Now, of course, there are some weapons that have alternate fire modes like the Stinger and Bulldog, and those are completely fine to use at long ranges. Same idea with machine guns. Aiming down sights increases its fire rate and has its benefits. However, for all the other standard guns, you pretty much never want to aim down sights, the only exception being the Vandal. At like 50 meters, you can scope in for that one tap. Moving on for our 8th tip that I guarantee will make you harder to hit when you hold an angle. Most players, when holding an angle, just kind of stand completely still. This makes sense on the surface, as you want to be completely accurate, and any movement would prevent that. However, if you study any of the pros, you'll notice when they're holding an angle, they're almost never standing completely still. Instead, they either incorporate one of these two techniques. First, they do what's called micro jiggles. This is when you lightly tap A and D back and forth to jiggle your character just ever so slightly. This is done to help counter the peeker's advantage that we touched on earlier. Since we are passively holding an angle, any enemies that swing on us will have that reaction time advantage. So if we incorporate these micro jiggles, we can help throw off their aim and increase our chances of dodging their first bullet or two when we make contact. The second technique is to jiggle peek the corner that we're holding. Now, there are pros and cons to this technique. The benefits are that you are trying to take peeker's advantage for yourself, or at least make it neutral by repeatedly peeking the angle instead of holding it. At the same time, we're constantly getting behind cover, so the chances of us dying on contact with an enemy are much lower than if we had just held the angle. The downsides are that you are less likely to land your shot and kill the opponent. This is because you won't be able to see the opponent swing in and prepare to take your shot. Instead, you'll be swinging into them, and this can catch players by surprise. At the same time, you are doing a lot of movement with counter strafes, so if you mistime your shots with your counter strafe, your shots will be inaccurate. Still, if you are holding an angle, you either want to be doing those micro jiggles in place or jiggle peeks instead of just standing completely still. This is especially true if you're holding a very common angle that an enemy would expect you to be in, as they will likely pre-aim and possibly even pre-fire you. In fact, that leads to the one exception to this rule. If you're holding an off angle that is unorthodox, then you actually can stand completely still, since you'll want to shoot as fast as you can and take advantage of the fact that you're trying to catch the opponent off guard with the off angle. And for our final reason why you're struggling with your aim, is because you're not running enough deathmatch games. First off, before you hop into ranked, you should be playing at least 2 deathmatch games at the bare minimum. Don't get me wrong, more is often better, but hey, not everyone has the time or patience for that. Most players don't even do this very essential warm-up of 2 deathmatch games. However, that's not all you should be using deathmatch for. You also need to have dedicated time where you're just strictly using deathmatch to focus on improving your aim. And yes, there's 100% a difference between using deathmatch to warm up versus using it to improve your aim. This is why we have an entire course dedicated on how to use deathmatch effectively on our website. So when you are using deathmatch to work on your aim, you want to be focusing on one specific part of your aim to work on, instead of just trying to grind deathmatch and improving everything at once. For example, this can mean specifically focusing on crosshair placement on different areas of the map and making sure you're always aiming at a head level and kind of learning the different angles. Or it could mean learning how to strafe shoot or counter strafe properly. Basically, you need to pick one thing that you're going to focus on improving when heading into deathmatch. This is different than when you warm up with deathmatch, where you aren't training to improve, but instead making sure your body has had time to adjust to the game before you jump into ranked. Either way, I can pretty much guarantee that you aren't running deathmatch games as much as you should be. It's one of the fastest and most effective ways to improve at Valorant, and so it should be a core part of your training routine. And remember, if you want to improve fast, win more gunfights, and get the rank you've always wanted, then there's nothing better than our hyper improvement system at SkillCapped.com. Check it out, link in the description below. Otherwise, you know the deal, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to keep up to date with the meta and get more premium guides with one goal in mind, helping you become a better player. We here at SkillCapped want to thank you for watching until the end, and we'll catch you in the next one.